She told the cops she was going to shoot him, then she did. The jury said not guilty of murder. Okay, so I need you to picture something with me. It's early morning. Two police officers are standing outside a house in Georgia. A woman walks up to them. She's called 911 3 separate times already. She triggered her home alarm to get someone dispatched. She literally flagged down a patrol car in her own neighborhood and begged the officer to follow her home. This woman has done everything you're supposed to do. And then, right before she walks inside, she turns to those officers and says something that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I first heard this case. She tells them she's going to shoot him in self-defense, and she's going to need them there as her witnesses. One of the officers tells her she's going to need to be able to articulate why deadly force was necessary, and she goes, "Oh, I can articulate it." Then she walks inside, goes to her truck first, actually, grabs a tire iron and a gun, goes back in, goes upstairs, and shoots Damonte Smith once in the chest as he's stumbling out of the house, bleeding, telling the officers she hit him with the metal thing and then shot him, asking them to hurry up because he thinks he's going to die. She's inside the house, saying bye to him. Bye, multiple times. While he's dying, Damonte died at the hospital, and here's the part that is going to make your brain short-circuit a little. A jury looked at all of that. The body camera audio of her announcing what she was about to do, the tire iron, the gun, the goodbye, all of it, and came back with not guilty of murder. I'm going to walk you through every piece of this case today. And I'll tell you right now, I don't have a clean take on this one. I've sat with it and I still don't, which is honestly kind of rare for me. But by the end of this video, I think you'll understand why. And I want to know where you land because the comments on this one are going to be something else. Let's go. So, who are these people? Because before we get into what happened that morning, I think you need to know who you're actually dealing with here. Quanisha Johnson, 30 years old, behavioral health technician, which means her job, her actual career, was helping people in mental health crisis. Think about that detail because it becomes relevant later in ways that are hard to ignore. She had 4 kids. 4. Including a 2-month-old infant at the time of all of this. 2 months postpartum. Still in the stage where you're not sleeping more than 3 hours at a stretch, your body is still recovering, your hormones are all over the place. And this woman was also working full-time and raising 3 other children on top of that. She was the only name on the lease of the house where this all happened. Every utility, her name. She built that situation herself, for herself, and her kids. And she was the one keeping it together. Damonte Smith was 29. He also had kids of his own, 3 of them. He had a history, legally and financially, that had been complicated for a while. He had recently gotten out of prison on a felony charge when he came back into Quanisha's life in a real way. And at the time of his death, he had active warrants for stalking and probation violations. That's not something the jury found out right away, by the way. That comes out later in the trial in a way that's actually kind of interesting, and I'll get to that. About 30 days before the shooting, Quanisha let Damonte move into her house, her lease, her name on everything. She let him in because he had nowhere to go. He was broke. He was out of options, and she helped him out. 30 days later, he was dead in her hallway. Within those 30 days, things went sideways fast. Arguments, threats, and then, about 3 weeks before the shooting, Damonte grabbed Quanisha during a fight and slammed her to the ground, just picked her up and put her on the floor. No charges, no consequences. He stayed in the house, and that assault just sat there underneath everything else that was about to happen. Hold on to that, because that moment, 3 weeks before the shooting, is essentially the spine of everything the defense argued at trial. It's the reason the jury had any sympathy for her at all. And it's also the thing the prosecution tried to reframe in a very specific way that I want to walk you through when we get to the trial. But first, the night before, November 26th into the 27th, 2022, Quanisha's friends invited her out for a birthday celebration, a nightclub, and she went. And look, I think it matters to actually sit with the context here for a second. This woman had just been through her 4th pregnancy. She had a 2-month-old. She had been working through her maternity leave. She had 3 other kids. She had a man living in her house who had put his hands on her 3 weeks earlier. And her friends invited her out to celebrate someone's birthday. She went. She deserved to go. She left Damonte home with 3 of the kids and told him she'd be back by 6 in the morning. During the night, there was some kind of incident at the club, an argument involving her friend group. She let Damonte know it happened, dropped him her location so he knew where she was, and moved on to another spot with her people. Normal night out stuff. The kind of thing that happens. Her phone died at some point during all of this. She had 2 phones, one personal and one for her business. The personal one ran out of battery while she was out, so she's not reachable. Nobody can get through to her. Back at the house, 6 a.m. comes and goes, and Quanisha isn't home and isn't answering. And I want to be fair here for a second because I think Damonte's reaction in those hours actually matters, and it doesn't get talked about enough. He called her aunts, he was worried about her, he told them about the fight at the club, and they all started calling hospitals and jails trying to find her, all of them together trying to track her down because they thought something bad might have happened. That's not nothing. That's a man who was scared for someone. Whatever else was true about Damonte Smith and whatever he did later that morning in those hours between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m., he was genuinely trying to find out if she was okay. But then his worry turned into something else. Around 9, Quanisha got back to her car, plugged in her dead phone, and everything started loading. Messages, missed calls. And some of those messages were very different from worried texts asking where she was. He told her in writing that when she got home, he was going to beat her. Explicit. That guarantee. Her aunts saw the messages because they were still on the phone with him when he sent them. And on a 3-way call, he said it out loud. The aunts heard it directly, and Quanisha, sitting in her car, phone charging, reading those messages, with the memory of being slammed to the ground 3 weeks earlier, still sitting right there in her body, the way those things sit in your body, made a decision. She was not going into that house by herself, so she called 911. She said she was getting threats from the man at her house, and she was scared to go home. She asked for an officer to meet her there. There were some issues with the address coming through clearly on the dispatch. The call got complicated, and she ended up waiting. And waiting. She called again. Still waiting. She triggered her home alarm and talked to the security company, told them to dispatch police, told them she did not want to go into the house with Damonte there. She called 911 a 3rd time. And finally, she drove around her neighborhood, spotted a patrol car, literally pulled over and flagged the officer down, and asked him personally to follow her home. 4 separate attempts. 4. To get law enforcement to be present before she went back into that house. Now here is where the 2 completely opposite readings of this case split apart. And I want you to hold both of them in your head at the same time as we go through the rest of this, because I think that's the only honest way to look at it. Reading 1, this is a woman who was genuinely terrified, who had been physically assaulted by this man, who took explicit written threats seriously because she had already felt what his hands could do to her, who did everything right, who called and called and called for help, who was let down by a system that was supposed to protect her. 4 attempts to get police to intervene, and none of them worked the way they should have. And so when she felt she had no other choice, she acted. Reading 2. Those 4 calls were not about getting protection. They were about building a paper trail. She had already decided what she was going to do. She was angry, she was embarrassed in front of her family when he threatened her on that 3-way call, and she was going to handle it. And everything she did from 9 a.m. onward was constructing a record that would justify what she had already made up her mind to do. The prosecution argued reading 2. The defense argued reading 1. And everything that happened when she got to that house, the whole sequence in the driveway, on the porch, and then inside, is where those 2 readings collide. 2 officers were there when she arrived. And what happened next in that driveway is genuinely one of the more layered and strange sequences I've come across in a case like this. Damonte came out of the house, and he was holding the 2-month-old baby, the infant, dressed only in a diaper. It was around 60 degrees, which doesn't sound freezing, but is genuinely cold for a newborn in just a diaper. When Quanisha saw that, something shifted in her. She got loud. She got confrontational. She and the officers both demanded Damonte hand over the baby. He refused. And then she said something to him right there in front of the officers that the prosecution pointed to as one of the clearest windows into her actual state of mind in that moment. She told him the baby wasn't his, that he wasn't on the birth certificate, and that she was going to disappear again for a few hours. What was he going to do about it? She was poking him deliberately. With 2 police officers standing right there, the officers noted in their reports that of the 2 people in that driveway, Quanisha was the more aggressive one, not Damonte. Think about that for a second. She came home claiming she was terrified of this man. She had called 911 4 times. And when she got there with police present, she was the one escalating. The officers told them both to go inside and cool down. Damonte went in first. And then, before Quanisha followed him inside, she had that conversation with the officers. The one on body camera. The one that is the center of this entire case. She told them she was going to shoot him in self-defense. That she needed them as witnesses. That she was so ready for this. Let me stay here for a minute because I don't think this moment gets enough attention. She's standing outside her house. There are 2 law enforcement officers right in front of her. She's about to walk inside. And she is telling those officers in advance that she is going to use deadly force. She is not saying, I'm afraid he might do something. She is not saying, if he comes at me, I might have to defend myself. She is saying she is going to shoot him. One of the officers responded by telling her she would need to be able to articulate why deadly force was necessary. A pretty significant thing for a cop to say to someone who just announced they're about to shoot someone, and she told him she could articulate it, like she'd already thought through exactly how she was going to explain it afterward. Then she went inside. The officers stayed outside. Their plan was apparently to give it a few minutes and see what happened. Quanisha went to her truck, got the gun and the tire iron, went back inside, went to the bottom of the stairs, and told her 7-year-old daughter to call 911 and tell them that Damonte had hit her. The child made that call. Quanisha's voice is audible in the background of the recording. Then Quanisha went upstairs. What happened up there is partially disputed. The prosecution says she hit Damonte in the head with the tire iron first, then shot him. The defense's framing was somewhat different, but what's not disputed is that she shot him once in the chest. He made it out of the house. He stumbled toward the officers and told them she had hit him with the metal thing and then shot him. He told them to hurry up because he didn't think he was going to make it. He didn't make it, and while all of that was happening, while Damonte was stumbling, bleeding out of the house, Quanisha was inside saying goodbye to him. Bye, multiple times. Calm enough to say a word. Multiple times. She was arrested immediately. The trial. This is where it gets even more complicated, if you can believe that. The prosecution's theory was premeditation. Simple and direct. She was humiliated when Damonte threatened her on that 3-way call in front of her family. She was done with him. She drove home and executed a plan. The 911 calls weren't about fear, they were about paperwork. The escort request wasn't about protection, it was about having witnesses. She scripted her 7-year-old's call before going upstairs. She announced her intention to the officers. She retrieved weapons she didn't need to retrieve from a truck that was outside the house, which means she had to actively make a choice to arm herself rather than just react to something happening in the moment. That's their case. And honestly, it hangs together. But the defense's case also hangs together. And that's what makes this so hard. The defense pointed out that Quanisha had no legal obligation under Georgia law to call police at all. None. Zero. She could have gone straight into that house when she got home and dealt with whatever happened inside and claimed self-defense with no paper trail whatsoever. Georgia's stand your ground law doesn't require you to take any prior steps. The fact that she spent 2 hours on the phone with 911 triggered an alarm, flagged down a cop. The defense argued all of that was not the behavior of someone who had already made up their mind to kill. It was the behavior of someone desperately trying to avoid having to do what she eventually did. They also argued that the conversation with the officers outside was misread. That a woman who had been physically assaulted by this man who had explicit written threats on her phone, who was terrified of going into that house, was essentially asking those officers to stay close because she was afraid of what might happen inside. Not announcing a murder. Asking for protection, and then the defense got a gift from the prosecution, an unexpected one. The state called Damonte's ex-girlfriend as a witness. She described him as a great person, caring, always laughing. Good nature, solid character, Classic character witness stuff. The problem is that once you open the door to character evidence, both doors open, Damonte's past could now come in. And Damonte's past included arrests for marijuana distribution, illegal firearm possession during a felony, multiple traffic offenses, and at the time of his death, active warrants for stalking and probation violations. The jury heard all of it. The prosecution handed the defense that opening, and the defense walked right through it. 2 moments in the trial stand out above everything else. And I've been going back and forth on both of them. The first one is the 7-year-old. Before the trial, she was interviewed by forensic child interviewers. These are specialists, people trained to talk to kids about traumatic events in ways that are supposed to minimize contamination of their memory. In those early interviews, she said she saw her mother hit Damonte with the pole before the shooting. That's significant. That's a child witness saying the victim got hit first, which would mean Quanisha went on the offensive before any physical threat from Damonte materialized. Then the trial happens, and she takes the stand. And she says the opposite. She says it was Damonte who hit her mother with the pole. The prosecution said she was coached, that someone got to her between those early interviews and the courtroom. The defense pushed back on that. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. This is a child who was in that house, who heard a gunshot, whose mother was arrested in front of her, who went through forensic interviews with strangers asking her about the worst day of her life, and then had to sit in a courtroom months later and testify. Kids in that situation don't have consistent, reliable, clean memories. They just don't. That's not how trauma works on a child's brain. But the switch was also very convenient. And the prosecution's suggestion that she was coached is not crazy. It's not provable, but it's not crazy. The second moment is one word. As Quanisha was leaving the house after the shooting, she said something to the officers outside. And what that one thing was became genuinely contested at trial in a way I wasn't expecting. The prosecution said she told them, "I told y'all I was going to do it." The defense said she told them, "I told y'all he was going to do it." I and he, one letter. The difference between a confession and a vindication. The audio was played in court multiple times. Reporters in the room came out with different interpretations. Legal analysts disagreed. The jury had to make a call on something nobody could definitively hear. That right there is reasonable doubt territory, and I think the jury felt it. Quanisha testified in her own defense. And I want to spend some real time on this because the decision to put a defendant on the stand is never simple, and what happened here shows exactly why. On direct examination, her attorney built a picture of a woman who was backed into a corner. She talked about being slammed to the ground 3 weeks earlier. She talked about the fear she felt reading those messages that morning. She talked about calling 911 again and again and feeling like no one was coming to help her. She described going upstairs and feeling like she had no other option. She got emotional on the stand. She cried. She was visibly shaken. And then the prosecutor got his turn. First thing he went after was the fact that 2 weeks after Damonte physically assaulted her, she left her 3 kids in his care and went out all night. If she was genuinely so terrified of this man that she ultimately felt she had to shoot him, why on earth did she trust him alone with children under 8 for an entire night just 14 days after he put her on the ground? There isn't a great answer to that question. The defense tried to frame it as complex, as the kind of decision battered women make because leaving isn't as simple as it looks from the outside. That's a legitimate argument. But on the stand, in the moment, under questioning, it didn't land cleanly. Then he went after the 911 call, the one where she told the operator she wasn't worried about her safety, her own words, on tape. And now, here in court, she's describing being in fear for her life. The prosecutor made sure the jury felt the weight of that contradiction. Then there was the goodbye. The prosecutor asked her directly about saying bye to Damonte as he was dying. She said she didn't fully remember it, that she wasn't in her right senses, that she had essentially blacked out during the shooting itself. The prosecutor wasn't buying it, and he made sure the jury heard exactly why. If you blacked out, if you weren't conscious of what you were doing, if you were operating on pure fear and instinct, then you don't calmly say goodbye to someone multiple times. Bye doesn't come out of a blackout. Bye comes out of someone who knows exactly what they just did. The cross-examination was rough. She held up. She didn't fall apart completely, but it was rough. And I think some of the things she said on direct that were supposed to be emotional and persuasive looked different in the context of what the prosecutor pulled apart on cross. The jury came back, and I'm going to be honest, the verdict surprised me. Not guilty of malice murder, guilty of voluntary manslaughter, guilty of aggravated assault, guilty of firearms possession during a felony, guilty of cruelty to children, that top finding, not guilty of malice murder after the body camera audio of her telling officers she was going to shoot him after the 7-year-old's coached or not coached testimony flip, after the goodbye, after the tire iron she didn't have to go get, after all of it. The jury said this was not premeditated murder. Here is how I think they got there, and this is me working it out, not stating it as fact. Voluntary manslaughter in Georgia requires that you killed someone but did it in the heat of passion, in response to provocation that would cause a reasonable person to lose self-control without the kind of sustained, cold, deliberate intent that malice murder requires. The jury seems to have decided that everything that accumulated on that woman, the assault 3 weeks before, the threats that morning, seeing her infant out in the cold, the officers who kept not showing up when she called, everything that built and built until she was standing in that driveway and then going upstairs, constituted a kind of overwhelming provocation that pushed her to act without the sustained premeditation that would make it first-degree murder. I understand that reasoning. I'm not sure I fully buy it because she told the police she was going to shoot him before she did it. And that is on tape, and I don't know how you hear that and conclude there was no premeditation. But I understand the reasoning. The sentence was 20 years. 10 incarcerated, 10 probation. Of the 10 incarcerated, 5 actual prison and 5 house arrest. The state wanted 25 plus 5 probation. What she got was lighter than that. And then the judge gave her an appeal bond. She's currently at home under house arrest while her conviction is being challenged. Legal commentators said the sentence was unusually lenient. I'll let you decide what you think about that. I want to close on something I've been thinking about since I first got into this case. There's a version of this story where Quanisha Johnson is exactly what the defense said she was. A woman who was victimized, who tried to do everything right, who got let down by a system that was supposed to protect her, and who finally did what she felt she had no other choice but to do. That version is real. The assault happened, the threats happened, the 4911 calls happened, the failure of the system to actually show up for her when she needed it happened. All of that is documented, and there's another version where she was angry, where she was done, where she made a decision and then built a case around it in real time using a 7-year-old child and 3 emergency calls and a tire iron and a gun and the words she knew she'd need to be able to articulate afterward. That version is also real. The announcement to the officers happened, the goodbye happened, the scripted 911 call from a child happened. All of that is also documented. What I keep getting stuck on is that both of those versions might be true simultaneously, not one or the other, both. A woman who was genuinely a victim and who also at some point that morning crossed a line from fear into something else, something more deliberate, and I don't think those two things cancel each other out. I think they coexist in this case in a way that the law's categories don't really have clean language for. The jury tried to find the right category. Voluntary manslaughter was their answer. I'm not sure it's wrong. I'm not sure it's right either. Damonte Smith was 29 years old. He had kids. He had people who loved him. He walked out of that house bleeding and asked officers to hurry up because he thought he was going to die. He was right. He was 29. Quanisha Johnson is home right now under house arrest with her kids. She's fighting a conviction. She's also a mother of 4 who let someone into her house to help them out, and 30 days later was standing in a courtroom charged with murder. No clean hands, no easy answers. That's the honest summary of this one. Drop your take in the comments. Premeditated murder or self-defense? Did the jury find the right middle ground with voluntary manslaughter, or did they get it wrong in one direction or the other? And what do you make of that conversation with the officers before she went back inside? Because I still don't know what to do with that one. If you're new here, subscribe. We do this every week. Cases where the answer isn't on the surface and you actually have to think about it. See you in the next one.